Uh, the distance is not indifference. I want to say that first because it is the piece of this situation that is most likely to be misread from the outside. The pulling back, the quieter messages or the longer silences or the specific quality of someone who has been present and is now slightly less present in the ways that matter. The behavior that interpreted through the wrong lens looks like cooling, like interest diminishing, like someone who has decided to move away from something. They have not decided to move away from something. They have been moved by something, and the something has frightened them enough that the instinct to create space between themselves and the source of it activated before the conscious mind could override it. The distance is not indifference. The distance is the physical expression of being in love and not yet knowing what to do about it. The distance is not indifference. The distance is the physical expression of being in love and not yet knowing what to do about it. I want to give that one more layer before we continue because the distinction matters for how you hold what is happening. Indifference produces a specific quality of distance. The distance of someone who has simply moved on from something that mattered less than they thought is a settled distance. It does not produce residue. It does not create the specific, slightly charged quality of an unresolved thing in the space between two people. It is simply neutral, an absence of what was there, clear and clean in its own way. What is present in your situation is not that. What is present between you and this person is the opposite of neutral. It is the charged, unresolved, both of you in different ways, still engaged quality of something that has not concluded. The distance has pressure in it. The kind of pressure that belongs to something that is being held back rather than something that has naturally arrived at a point of rest. You have felt that pressure, even across the distance, even in the silence, even in the pulling back that has characterized their behavior. You have felt that something is still there because something is still there. It simply does not yet know what to do with itself. I want to begin with what is happening inside them because the behavior that you can see from the outside is the least informative piece of what is actually occurring. What is informative is the interior that the behavior is trying to manage. Something arrived without being invited. That is the specific quality of what they are dealing with, not a feeling they developed gradually that built up through the slow accumulation of positive experiences and growing understanding of who you are. Something that arrived, possibly suddenly, possibly in a specific moment that they can identify, possibly in the middle of something entirely ordinary that should not have produced anything extraordinary. And what arrived has a quality they did not expect. It is large, not the ordinary large of liking someone significantly, the specific, slightly overwhelming large of something that reorganizes. That does not coexist politely with the rest of your interior life. That requires adjustment from everything around it because it is not going to adjust itself to fit the available space. They do not have a container for something this size, and the absence of a container is producing the behavior you have been observing. Let me describe the war because there is a war happening in them, not metaphorically, the specific, daily, exhausting quality of an interior that is fighting itself across a clear line of division. On one side, what they feel, which is real and is large and is in its honest moments unmistakable, even to someone who would prefer it to be mistakable. The pull towards you, the specific involuntary quality of how you enter their awareness without being invited. The particular way that thoughts of you arrive with more weight and more persistence and more specificity than thoughts of most other things. On the other side, everything that makes that feeling feel dangerous, not you specifically, the situation of being in love with someone, the specific historical, entirely personal collection of reasons this person has for understanding love as something that produces risk rather than simply reward. Whatever shaped their relationship to vulnerability, whatever made the state of caring for someone deeply feel like a liability rather than an asset, those reasons are real. They are not excuses. They are not manufactured obstacles. They are the specific, personal, built from experience reasons that a real person has developed for being careful around exactly this kind of feeling. The war is between the feeling and the reasons. And the staying away is what happens when the reasons are winning a given day. I want to be specific about what love realizing itself looks like from the inside of someone who was not prepared for it. Because you deserve the full picture of what is happening on the other side of the distance. It arrives as recognition, not as a declaration they make to themselves, as the specific, slightly startling quality of suddenly understanding something that had been present for longer than the understanding was, of the interior simply knowing before the knowing has been officially formalized into thought or language or anything that can be examined and argued with, and then the argument begins. This is what you are not seeing from the outside. The arguing, the specific, continuous, sometimes winning and sometimes losing argument that someone has with themselves when they have recognized something they would prefer not to have recognized, that they would prefer to be smaller than it is, that they would prefer to be manageable, that they would prefer to fit neatly into the available container rather than requiring the entire interior reorganization that its actual size demands. They are arguing with themselves about you, about what they feel, about whether what they feel is what they think it is, about whether what they think it is requires them to do something about it. The argument is not settled. And until it settles, the behavior that you experience on the outside is going to continue to reflect the unsettled quality of what is happening on the inside. The argument is not settled. And until it settles, the behavior that you experience on the outside is going to continue to reflect the unsettled quality of what is happening on the inside. I want to describe what the arguing actually looks like in their daily experience, because I think naming it specifically will help you hold the situation with more accuracy and less of the personalization that tends to make it more painful than it needs to be. It is intermittent, not continuous in the way that a resolved feeling is continuous. The arguing produces variability, moments when what they feel is so present and so undeniable that the argument against it temporarily loses ground. And in those moments, a warmth, a movement toward the specific quality of someone whose interior has briefly settled in the direction of what they feel and who is, for that moment, simply in the feeling without fighting it. Those are the warm moments you have experienced. And then the argument reasserts itself. The reasons resurface. The fear returns with whatever renewed force it gathers in the distance, and the warmth cools. The movement stops. The space between you reinstates itself. Those are the cold moments. The variability is not manipulation. It is the direct, faithful reflection of an internal battle that is not yet won. This is important to understand because it changes how you interpret what you are experiencing. The warmth was real. The cold is also real. Both are honest expressions of an interior that has not yet reached a stable resolution. What is not yet present is the settled version. And the settled version is what the situation actually requires. Now, the but, because the but is the other half of this reading and it belongs to you entirely. Understanding why they are staying away, understanding the war and the recognition and the unsettled argument that the war is producing does not create an obligation on your part to wait without limit for the war to resolve. It does not require you to hold the space open indefinitely while they fight their internal battle on their own timeline without any clear signal of when or whether it will produce the outcome that would require something from you in return. Understanding is not accommodation. This is the distinction I want you to hold clearly. You can understand why someone is doing something and still have a clear sense of what that something costs you and what you are and are not willing to continue absorbing at your own expense. The cost of holding space for someone who is staying away because they are in love with you is real. It is the cost of being in proximity to a situation that is unresolved while being unable to fully engage with it because the other party is not yet ready to engage. Of having a portion of your interior occupied by something that cannot move forward because the other person has not yet moved forward. Of the specific holding pattern quality of someone who is waiting for a resolution they have no direct influence over. That cost is real and it has a limit. I want to speak to what you deserve in this situation, not what they are capable of offering right now. What you actually deserve. You deserve someone who is present to what they feel, not necessarily someone for whom being present to their feelings is easy or natural or without its own complexity, but someone who is at least in the process of moving toward that presence rather than retreating from it. Someone whose response to realizing they are in love with you is to move toward you rather than away from you. Whose instinct, even if it is imperfect and imperfectly executed, is in the direction of closing distance rather than creating it. The staying away is understandable as a brief, temporary response to the arrival of something overwhelming. It is entirely human and entirely comprehensible and deserves the compassion of being understood rather than judged. As a sustained, ongoing pattern that has no clear end, no clear movement toward resolution, no communication that suggests the war is progressing toward an outcome that has anything to do with you or your well-being. It is something else. It is the other person processing their own experience at your expense. Tell me in the comments if you are sitting in this specific position right now, if you are holding space for someone who's staying away you understand, but whose continued staying away is beginning to cost you something you cannot keep absorbing. Tell me where you are in this. I want to know. Let me speak to what the right kind of presence actually looks like. Because I do not want to leave you with only the negative space of what the staying away is not, without giving you the positive content of what you are actually waiting for. Someone who is in love with you and is moving toward rather than away from, that love does not have to have it all figured out. They are allowed to be scared. They are allowed to not know exactly what they are doing or how to do it or what the right next step is. They are allowed to be imperfect and uncertain and slightly more vulnerable than they are comfortable being. What they are not allowed, if they want you to keep holding the space, is to be absent. The imperfect, uncertain, slightly terrified person who is moving toward you anyway, who is showing up in whatever form they can manage while they are still in the middle of figuring out what they feel, is someone you can work with, someone who is producing evidence that the war is resolving in your direction, even if the resolution is not yet complete. The person who is simply away, producing nothing except the ongoing cost of your waiting, is a different situation. And the difference between those two situations is what the Bud is here to protect you from collapsing. I want to speak to something important about the war they are in, because I think understanding it more fully will help you have the right relationship to it, one that honors both your compassion and your own interests simultaneously. The war is not about you. I want to say that clearly because it is the piece that most people in this situation personalize and suffer over unnecessarily. The war is about their own history, their own relationship to the state of being in love, their own specific personal reasons for finding that state frightening or destabilizing or demanding more courage than they have reliably been able to access. You did not create the war. You created the feeling that revealed the war's existence. But the war itself, the specific thing they are fighting with themselves about, has nothing to do with your worthiness or the quality of what you have been offering or anything about who you are, how you have engaged with this situation. You cannot win the war for them, and you are not responsible for winning it. What you can do, and what has the most integrity in this situation, is be clear with yourself about how much of the war you are willing to witness from the outside while it continues, and be honest about the answer to that question without softening it in the direction of whatever feels most considerate to them. Your clarity about your own limit is not a punishment. It is information, and it may, in fact, be the only kind of information that is capable of influencing the speed at which they settle the war. Your clarity about your own limit is not a punishment. It is information, and it may, in fact, be the only kind of information that is capable of influencing the speed at which they settle the war. I want to add something to this because I think it is the most counterintuitive piece of the reading and the most practically important. The limit, clearly communicated, is an act of respect, not only self-respect, though it is that, respect for them as well. Because continuing to hold space indefinitely without communicating the cost, without naming what the waiting is requiring, is a form of managing their experience at the expense of your own honesty, is protecting them from information that they deserve to have, is making their war easier to sustain by removing one of the real-world consequences of continuing to fight it. The real-world consequence of the war continuing is that you have a limit. That limit is not abstract. It is specific and real, and eventually, if the war does not resolve, it will produce an actual outcome that is different from the holding of space. They deserve to know this, not as a threat, not delivered in anger or in desperation, as the honest, calm, this is where I actually am communication of someone who has been genuine throughout this entire situation and who is continuing to be genuine now. The genuineness includes the limit. Let me speak to what happens if you name your limit, because I think there is a fear present in many of you who are in this situation that naming the limit will end things definitively. That saying, I understand, but I cannot wait indefinitely, will produce in them the decision to simply stop, to use the limit as permission to confirm that the staying away was the right choice after all. That fear is understandable, but consider the alternative. The alternative is continuing to hold space without naming the limit, continuing to absorb the cost, continuing to be available for a resolution you have no timeline on, while the other person fights their war on their own schedule without the specific, direct, real world information that there is a point after which the space will no longer be held. That information changes the calculation, not always immediately, not always in the way you hope, but it is the most genuine thing available to you in this situation. It is the specific, honest communication of where you actually are, which is the kind of communication that this situation, which has been characterized by one person's inability to communicate honestly, actually needs more of rather than less. Name the limit, not as an ultimatum designed to produce a particular behavior, as the honest statement of what is true for you, and then let their response be their response. As we close, I want to give you one image that I think captures the full texture of this reading. Two people separated by a distance that only one of them chose. On one side, someone in the middle of a war with themselves about something real. Someone whose feelings have arrived with a size that frightened them into the distance. Someone who is, in their best moments, genuinely in love with you, and in their more defended moments, genuinely afraid of what that means. On the other side, you understanding the war, genuinely understanding it, holding the comprehension of why the distance exists without reducing it to something small or dismissing the person who created it as simply unavailable or unworthy. And also knowing what the holding costs, knowing what it requires, knowing what it takes from your own daily life and your own interior and your own available resources to maintain the space while the other person completes the war on their own timeline. Both things true simultaneously. The compassion and the limit, the understanding and the self-preservation. This is the but, not a wall, not a punishment, not the withdrawal of genuine care. A clear, honest, self-respecting awareness that your own well-being matters in this equation, and the willingness to say so.